All right, so our last refinement to our Cat Facts app here is we're now going to randomize the fact that we show the fact that we show that we choose and show on the screen. So in our previous incarnation, in our last episode, we were able to get the cat fact response object from the database, and we were able to drill down and get a fact. But the problem was that that fact was always the same because we're always pulling it from position 0 in the index of facts, in the data, the list of data that had all the facts in it. So we're always pulling it from the same position in the list. So it's not surprising when you think about it that we get the same fact every time. Okay, so it'd be neat to kind of add some randomness in. So I'm going to show you how we do that here, just as kind of a last thing to do on this app. So added a couple of things. So here's my code. The new things I've added are all in this function here. Okay, basically this block of code here. And that's in my getFacts function. So that's the function that's called when I click the button that goes off, hits the database, gets the data back. If it's valid data, then it does all this stuff here. If it's invalid data, it's going to print a message on the console so we can debug that. Okay, so the new stuff I got here is basically in this section here. So this is where I'm going to implement the randomness aspect of it. Okay, so remember how the data was structured. If you remember, there was a list inside of it called data. You can kind of see how we kind of set that up. So the response object we get has a list in it called data, and that's where all the cat facts are. Now, what we need to know is how many items are in that list. What's the length of that list? How many items are there in the list? So that we can choose one at random, and then we can display it on the screen. Okay, so in order to find how many items there are in the list, there's a built-in way to do that. Okay, and that's called the length parameter of a list. Length is how long it is. Okay, so that's this line right here. So let number of facts equals response.data.length. So .length, that bit on the end, what it does is it takes this here, data, which we know is a list because we saw it in the response when we looked at it on the console. It takes that and tells us how long it is, how many items are in that list. We're going to store that information in this variable called number of facts. Okay, then the next thing I want to do is now that I know how long the list is, how many items are in the list, I want to generate a random number in that range. So out of the length of the list, I want to generate a number randomly that picks one of those values. So that's what I do here. So random fact index, I'm going to make a variable called random fact index, which is going to be a random number that'll pick one of the items in the list. Okay, so to do that, I have to do a little math. Okay, and that's what this here is. So there's a built-in random function in JavaScript, but what it does is it generates a random number between 0 and 1. So it generates some decimal random number between 0 and 1, like 0.79, 0.32. It generates a random decimal between 0 and 1. So in order to take that random decimal between 0 and 1 and turn it into an integer, whole number, in the range of values that we need to pick one from the number of values in the list, we have to do a little math, and that's what that here is for. So math floor is a rounding function. Math random, that there generates a random number between 0 and 1. And then when I multiply by number of facts, that scales it up so that it picks a random number in the range of the length of the list. So it doesn't go beyond the end, and it doesn't go before. It picks one that's in the range of the length of the list, and it'll give that to me. So that'll give me a random number, a random so-called index. Remember, the way that we access values in a list is we give them a value. We specify their position in the list, and that's called the index. So this will give me a random index for a value in the list. Then I take that random index and I pull the data from the response object, and I'm going to display that as, I'm going to store it in my cat facts variable, state variable, and then I'm going to display that on the screen. So now instead of always displaying the same cat fact, this one should now display a random one. So let's test it out. So I click it once. Okay, so the fact is cats make more than 100 different sounds, whereas dogs make around 10. Let's click it again. Okay, so now see how when I clicked it again, a different fact came up this time. Wikipedia has a recording of a cat meowing because why not? Let's try it again. So if I click it, get another fact that's random. Most cats are lactose intolerant, etc. Okay, so if I keep clicking it, I get a different one. Okay, now sometimes you see the same one coming up, like this one here. We saw that previously, a couple ones back. That's because there's only a limited number of facts to choose from, and so sometimes just based off chance, you're going to get the same. You're going to get the same one. Okay, but it's kind of luck of the draw. So it seems like we've been getting that one for a while. Okay, here's a new one. Okay, so here's kind of just a neat little refinement, just making some randomness there. Okay, but really the point of these videos that you've seen in this series here is how do you go off and get some data from a database? And the answer is it's varied, because in this case I showed you how to get some data from this free endpoint, Cat Facts. This one, relatively speaking, is fairly simple as far as databases go. Some are more complex. You might need to send a password. You might need to register for an account and send a password when you request some data. When you get the data back, it might be more complex. So there's no standard format that you're going to get the data back, and there's no standard way of requesting the data. So this was an example, a simple example. Whatever database you want to use, we have to really take a look at. We got to read the specifications, read the documentation. We got to figure out, okay, how do we modify, how do we tweak an example like this to get the data that you want. Okay, and of course, if you're doing something, say like a Google map, the data might not even be text. So when you get the data back, it might be a whole different way of incorporating it into your site. Okay, so each one is different. That's kind of the neat thing about coding, is each thing is different. It's not just just follow step 1, step 2, step 3. Everything is different, so that's where you use your creativity and your ingenuity to figure out how to get things to work out how you want. Okay, but here's a simple example. Hopefully this will kind of get you off the ground, and then depending on what database you wanna get data from, then we got to figure out, okay, how do we tweak it and how do we modify it so to get the data that we want.